بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. Inshallah, we are beginning the commentary of the fourth sermon of Nahjul Balagha, and it's a fairly short sermon, and this was a sermon that Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib delivered after the Battle of Jamal. And as we explained, and we will explain inshallah, that the Battle of Jamal is the first civil war in Islam, basically the first battle, civil war, and that was just months into the Khilafah of Amir al-Mu'mineen Imam Ali alayhi salam after Uthman was killed. And then three of the heads of the Sahaba, Talha, Zubayr, and Aisha, they waged a war against Amir al-Mu'mineen, and many were killed, thousands were killed in that battle, the Battle of the Jamal. The reason why it's named the Battle of the Jamal, the camel, was because Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, she was riding a camel, and as long as she was in the middle of the battlefield and there were soldiers around her and she was on the camel, and the battle came to an end when the Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, he brought down the camel. He struck the camel on its feet, on its legs. The camel fell and the battle came to an end, and Aisha was escorted to the house of the Prophet by her brother, by the command of Amir al-Mu'mineen, who sent her brother Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr, and he escorted her. So before we go into this sermon of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the fourth sermon of Amir al-Mu'mineen, let's give a context of the battle and why did the battle take place? What was the justification for it? So initially, Talha and Zubayr and Aisha, as we mentioned, they were all upset with Uthman. All the Muslims were upset with Uthman, and no one helped them, and they all instigated against him. Even Muawiyah, who's they're both from the same relatives. We mentioned when we were describing the khutbah al-Shaqshaqiyya that Muawiyah didn't even help Uthman. He had his soldiers waiting on the border. He didn't take them in so they could actually help Uthman. He didn't help him. So Uthman was killed. The Muslims, they came, they ran to Amir al-Mu'mineen and they gave him allegiance. Once the Muslims they gave allegiance to Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali, he wrote a letter to Muawiyah. Muawiyah was the governor that Uthman had appointed and Umar before him had appointed of Damascus and the Sham area. So he sends him a letter, he tells him, Uthman was killed with something that had nothing to do with me. And the Muslims, they gave me allegiance and this was their choice. So therefore, I am the Khalifa of Rasulullah. So give me bay'ah, give me allegiance. Muawiyah, of course, didn't like that. Muawiyah, he has hatred for Amir al-Mu'mineen. Muawiyah joined Islam the last year, the last very short while of the life of the Prophet. After the Fath, after the conquest of Mecca, that's when Muawiyah and his father Abu Sufyan, they came and they joined the religion of Islam. So they were never there in the beginning. They were fighting the Prophet in Badr and Uhud and Ahzab. So, and they hate Amir al-Mu'mineen because Imam Ali was the one who, basically, he was the one who fought them. And he was the one who was the sword of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa. Muawiyah knows if Imam Ali becomes in power, he's going to remove him. So he says, let me instigate. So Muawiyah sends a letter to Zubayr. He sends a letter to Zubayr. He tells him, you are Amir al-Mu'mineen. Zubayr, you are Amir al-Mu'mineen. And you are the one who's worthy of this Khilafah, and Uthman was killed unjustly. And you need to go and ask for the blood of Uthman, and be careful, don't lose the Iraq, Basra and Kufa. This is something that belongs to you. So Zubayr has just given bay'ah to Amir al-Mu'mineen. He has just given allegiance to Amir al-Mu'mineen. But now he sees this letter, wow, someone's calling me Amir al-Mu'mineen. And Muawiyah, he tried to fool Talha as well. He said, and if Zubair, if you do not become Amir al-Mu'mineen, then it should be Talha. So he got them trapped. And Muawiyah was very, he was conniving. He was very smart in the way that he fools people. So Talha and Zubair, they said, wow, someone's calling us Amir al-Mu'mineen. We have a chance at this. They go to Imam Ali and they ask for power. They ask to rule Iraq, Basra, and Kufa. And according to some reports, Zubair wanted to rule Iraq and Talha wanted to rule Yemen. So Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says, let me see. I have to make my own decision with this and let things play out, and then we'll see what will happen. Because Amir al-Mu'mineen is the Imam. He has to make the decisions that he thinks are the best for the Ummah, not for his own interest, for the Islam as a whole. And Imam Ali, he saw that these two, they were going after this dunya. So Talha and Zubair, they realized that Imam Ali is not going to give them anything. And therefore, they decided to go to Mecca where Aisha was. And they come to Imam Ali, they tell him, we want to do Umrah. He tells them, you don't want to do Umrah, you want to do Ghadra, you want to betray. And they end up leaving. And as they're leaving Medina, they're telling people, we did not give bay'ah. We don't have a bay'ah for Ali ibn Abi Talib. We don't want to give bay'ah to Imam Ali, even though they did give bay'ah. They did give allegiance to Amir al-Mu'mineen, but now they took it back and they left. Imam Ali alayhi salam, he leaves them. They go to Mecca, and there they go and pressure Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, who the Qur'an has a direct order for the wives of the Prophet. The wives of the Prophet are not supposed to be like any other woman. And the Qur'an said that the wives of the Prophet, they can't get married after the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And they knew that. They had the choice of leaving during the life of the Prophet, or they could stay. But if they stay, there are certain rules that apply to them. One of them is that they cannot get married and they have to stay in their houses. وَقَرْنَ فِي بُيُوتِكُنْ. This is Surah Al-Ahzab, Surah 33, verse 32. وقرن يا نساء النبي لستن كأحد من النساء إن اتقين فلا تخضعن بالقول وقلن. Then the verse continues, and stay in your homes. There's a direct order for the wives of the Prophet to stay in their homes. She goes to Mecca. She says, I want to do Umrah. Okay, she left during the time when Uthman was under siege. And then Talha and Zubair, they go and they force her and they pressure her to come, because people are going to respect, if Aisha is out there, the wife of the Prophet, the daughter of Abu Bakr, people are going to fall for that. So Imam Ali in Sermon 171 of Nahjul Balagha, and we're jumping here just to get a clearer picture. He says, فَخَرَجُوا يَجُرُّونَ حُرْمَةَ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَآلِهِ كَمَا تُجَرُّ الْأَمَةِ عِنْدَ شِرَائِهَا. He said, he's describing what Talha and Zubair did. He says they left and they're dragging the hurma of Rasulullah. She's the wife of the Prophet. They're taking them with her the same way a slave is taken from the market when she is bought. Meaning that they didn't even respect Aisha, the wife of the Prophet. The one who respected her was Imam Ali, who put her back in her house and followed the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They did not even respect the wife of the Prophet. They came, they used her just so that they could get their own agenda. They want power. They use the wife of the Prophet, and she fell for it. كما تجر الأمة عند شرائها متوجهين بها إلى البصرة فحبس نساءهما في بيوتهما وأبرز حبيس رسول الله. He says they left their wives and their women in their homes, because each man, they want to keep their women and their wives protected. So they kept their woman protected, but they took out the woman of the Prophet who's supposed to be protected and supposed to be in her house. He's saying the way the way they treated her by taking her out, they're actually doing injustice to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Would you take your own wife and your own daughters and the women from your house, take them out to the battle? So they did that with Aisha just so that they could get legitimacy. So they used her. And she fell for it and she went, even though Rasulullah had warned her. He tells her, oh Aisha, don't go out, and the dogs of Hawab are going to bark at you. They pass an area and the dogs of Hawab, of that area, they come and they bark at her. She gets scared they come and they bring 50 people to swear, to do qasam on the Qur'an that this is not hawab, even though it was hawab. So this was the first time in history where people actually swore on the Qur'an by lying. So they go and the battle takes place. So once they're in Mecca, they Talha and Zubair, and they take Aisha, they go to Basra. There an opposition army was formed, and Imam Ali alayhi salam at that time, months into his caliphate, he has to deal with Muawiyah. Muawiyah is like the enemy, the real enemy, and who's declaring that no, Ali ibn Abi Talib killed Uthman, and we have to fight him, and I'm not giving him bay'ah, and he started preparing an army. Imam Ali is preparing to go and confront Muawiyah, but then you have people who were close to Imam Ali, people who were in the house of the Prophet, people who were from the close Sahaba. Muawiyah was never very from the close Sahaba. He wasn't even a Muslim most of the life of the Prophet, and then later on he came and he joined the religion of Islam later on in the life of the Prophet. But these individuals, they were there from the beginning. So this was a bigger danger. Imam Ali, instead of going to Damascus, he goes to Basra to confront them. So he goes and he sends his son Imam al-Hasan and Abdullah ibn Abbas. They go to Kufa and they bring an army from Kufa. And there they confront them. For 3 days, Imam Ali, he goes out and he gives lectures. He gives sermons. We should not fight. Let us be united. We are the Sahaba of Rasulullah. Let's do this. He writes a letter to Talha. He writes a letter to Zubair, to Aisha, until he comes and he calls Zubair, because Zubair is the cousin of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Zubair is the son of Safiya. Safiya is the aunt of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the aunt of the Prophet. Safiya is the aunt of the Prophet. She's the sister of Abu Talib and Abdullah and Abbas and Hamza. She's their sister. So Zubair is the son of Safiya, meaning they're cousins. So Imam Ali, he goes out and he calls out, he's riding a mule, and he goes out and he calls Zubair. He tells them, call me Zubair. Id'u li az-Zubair ibn al-Awwam. فإني Ali. Call Zubair, I'm Ali ibn Abi Talib. So Zubair comes and they come close to one another. Now you have an army here and an army here. They come close to one another where the necks of their horses, they come close together. So that means they were very close to one another. So Amir al-Mu'mineen, he tells him, Ya Zubair, أنشدتك الله أتذكر يوم مر بك رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله ونحن في مكان كذا وكذا فقال يا زبير ألا تحب عليا. He tells him, Oh Zubair, do you remember that day we were with the Prophet? Now the Prophet has been dead for over 24 years. The Prophet has passed away 24 years. And this story is before the departure of the Prophet. So he's reminding him, he's telling him, do you remember when we were with the Prophet in this such and such location? And Rasulullah asked you, Oh Zubair, do you love Ali? So فقلت, and you told him, ألا أحب ابن خالي وابن عمي وعلى ديني? Should I not love the one who's the son of my cousin, from the mother's side and from the father's side, and he is on my religion? Of course I love him. He's on my religion and he's related to me. And then Rasulullah tells him, فقال يا زبير أما والله لتقاتلنه وأنت ظالم له. Rasulullah tells him, Oh Zubair, there's going to come a day where you're going to fight Ali while you are oppressing Ali ibn Abi Talib. You are doing dhulm. فقال الزبير بلى والله لقد نسيته منذ سمعته من رسول الله. Then Zubair says, yes, I remember that event. I remember that incident. I had forgotten it and you just reminded me. So he says, I just remembered it. And then he says, Wallah la uqatilak. Wallah, I'm not going to fight you. He tells him, I'm not going to fight you. فرجع الزبير على دابته يشق الصفوف. Zubair goes back and he's going through the lines. The army had lined up. He's going through back until his son Abdullah ibn Zubair. His son, he has also a story later on during the time of Imam al-Hussein. His son, Aisha, she is the aunt of Abdullah ibn Zubair. So Abdullah ibn Zubayr is married to the daughter of Abu Bakr, not Aisha, but the sister of Aisha. So Aisha is the aunt of Abdullah Zubayr. She's his khala, meaning she's his mom's sister. So Abdullah ibn Zubayr, he was not as, his father had some purity in him, but later on he was fooled. But Abdullah ibn Zubayr, he didn't have that. And even Imam Ali alayhi salam, he says about Zubayr, he says Zubayr was from us, the Ahl al-Bayt, until his son grew older and brought him away. So, and his son Abdullah ibn Zubayr, later on during the time of Imam Hussein, he had an opportunity to support Imam Hussein and be with Imam Hussein, but he let Imam Hussein go to Karbala alone so that the area becomes clear for him, and he ruled for a while. And Mecca, there was bloodshed in Mecca during the time of Abdullah ibn Zubayr, and he was killed and crucified in Mecca by Al-Hajjaj later on. So Abdullah ibn Zubayr, the son of Zubayr, he comes and he tells him, فَقَالَ مَالَكَ, he tells him, oh dad, what are you doing? He says, Zubayr tells him, ذكرني علي حديثا سمعته من رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. Ali ibn Abi Talib reminded me of a hadith I heard of the Prophet, where the Prophet tells me you're going to fight him and you're going to be the oppressor. So he says, I don't want to fight him. Then his son, he uses politics, political words. He tells him, well, you didn't come here to fight. You came here as a reformer. He tells him, أول القتال جئت إنما جئت لتصلح بين الناس ويصلح الله بك هذا الأمر. You didn't come here to fight. You came here as a reformer. He's trying to manipulate him, telling him, yeah, we're not really fighting. We're reformers. Ali is in the wrong. So he says, Zubayr tells him, I did a qasam, I did half, I swore that I will not fight Ali ibn Abi Talib. His son tells him, free your slave, اعتق غلامك سرجس وقف حتى تصلح بين الناس. He tells him, free your slave, and you go against the swear. You swore, you said, Wallah, I'm not going to fight him. So free a slave and go and be a reformer and fix the situation. So according to traditions, he freed his slave and he allowed the battle to continue. This is one. And another, later on, they say his son, when Zubayr was hesitant, his son tells him, you are afraid of the sword of Ali ibn Abi Talib. That's why you're not fighting. So his son, first he tells him, you're a reformer. You're not fighting, you're a reformer. Later on, he comes and he tells him, no, you're afraid of Ali ibn Abi Talib. And of course, you tell a man you're afraid of someone. And Zubayr was a brave man. He was not afraid. Even on the day of Saqifa, on the day the house of Fatima Zahra was attacked, Zubayr was the first one who unsheathed his sword. He stood to defend the Ahlul Bayt. So once his son tells him, you're afraid of the sword of Ali ibn Abi Talib, what does he do? He takes out the sword and he rides his horse very fast towards the army of Imam Ali, and he starts circling around the army of Amir al-Mu'mineen to show that I'm not afraid. So Amir al-Mu'mineen, once they see Zubayr coming quickly with the sword, he tells his people, he tells them, أفرجوا للشيخ فإنه محرج. He tells them, let him do what he wants to do. He wants to show his strength because he was ridiculed. He was placed in a difficult situation. Just let him show his strength. As long as he doesn't want to fight. So there he goes and he circles around the army of Amir al-Mu'mineen, and then he goes back. Once the battle began, the army of that side of the army, they started throwing arrows. They started shooting arrows at the camp of Imam Ali. So then the battle had to begin. Here, Zubayr, he left the battle. As soon as the battle began, he left. He just got on his horse and he went right away because he remembered the hadith of the Prophet. He left. As he was leaving, or he had left, he went for a distance. He was far from Basra, far from where the battle was taking place. A man from the camp of Amir al-Mu'mineen by the name of Ibn Jarmuz. This man, he got on his horse and he started chasing Zubayr. Once he saw Zubayr sitting down, he goes and he beheads him. He goes and he kills Zubayr. So he comes back bringing the head of Zubayr to Amir al-Mu'mineen. He's carrying it. Imam Ali alayhi salam, when he saw the head of Zubayr, he was upset. and he tells the man, سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله يقول بشر قاتل ابن صفية بالنار. He says, I heard Rasulullah say, give news to the one who kills the son of Safiya, meaning Zubair, that he's going to the hellfire. The one who kills the son of Safiya is going to the hellfire. Why? Because he chased him out of the battle. Zubair left the battle, even though he had instigated and he started and the fitna was going on. But the last moment he changed, and he came and he killed him even though he left the battle, and Zubair did not participate in the bloodshed. Now, does this mean that Zubair has a clean slate in front of God on the day of judgment and Allah is not going to hold him accountable for what he did? No, we believe that Zubair, even though most of his life he did good, but then later on he failed the test with Amir al-Mu'mineen, and he was one of those who caused the battle of Jamal. And he died and he didn't have bay'ah for Amir al-Mu'mineen, because the right thing that he should have done if he had felt bad, he should have joined the side of Amir al-Mu'mineen, like Al-Hurr bin Yazid al-Riyahi did. But Zubair, who knows who Imam Ali is, he knows Imam Ali is the rightful one, the one who from day one, he didn't join the side of Amir al-Mu'mineen, he left the battle. So this is why, according to our traditions, even though Zubair, his murder, according to the hadith, Ibn Jarmuz is from the hellfire, but even he, Zubair, he's going to have a tough time because his ending was a sour ending. This man, the man who killed him, Ibn Jarmuz, later on, he becomes from the Khawarij and he ends up fighting Amir al-Mu'mineen and he's killed in the battle of Nahrawan. So Amir al-Mu'mineen knew his inside. Deep inside, he wasn't pure. Deep inside, he was just in it for the, he wasn't really obeying Amir al-Mu'mineen, because those who fought against Amir al-Mu'mineen in Nahrawan, they didn't really obey Imam Ali alayhi salam. As for Talha remained in the battle. He didn't care, because Talha, we mentioned earlier, he didn't really like Imam Ali. Zubair loved Imam Ali, but Talha didn't like Imam Ali. Even on the day when they elected Uthman, Talha, he gave his vote to Uthman. He didn't give his vote to Amir al-Mu'mineen, because Talha, he had ties, he's from the same tribe as Abu Bakr, and there were issues between Bani Hashim and the tribe of Taim, the tribe of Abu Bakr. So basically, he didn't like Imam Ali, and he stayed in the battle. But as the battle was waging and the battle was going on, Marwan ibn al-Hakam, remember, he was the son-in-law of Uthman, and Uthman was killed. Marwan also escaped, and he goes and he joins the side of Aisha, Talha, and Zubair in Basra. He's fighting Imam Ali. But Marwan ibn al-Hakam, he sees Talha, who apparently they're on the same side. They're both supposedly fighting Imam Ali. But Marwan, he knows that it was Talha, one of those who instigated against Uthman. And now he's standing here and he's saying, yeah, we want to seek justice for Uthman. It's all a show. So Marwan ibn al-Hakam, he goes and he takes a poisoned arrow and he shoots Talha, even though they're on the same side, he shoots him in the leg, and it was a poisoned arrow. He bled to death until he died. Later on, at the end of the battle, Imam Ali, he saw the head of Talha as well. He saw that Talha was killed, and he turned his face and he was upset that Talha was killed. Because at the end of the day, Imam Ali, he didn't want to see the division within the Ummah, even though they turned against him, even though they oppressed him, they betrayed him, but he still didn't want to see that. He wants to see growth. So here, as for Aisha, she remained on the camel. She wasn't fighting, but as long as the camel was standing, a fierce battle was waging. And the battle was centered around the camel. They had to bring down the camel. Once the camel comes down, the battle will come to an end. So there was a tribe, Banu Dhubba. They were defending fiercely the camel. This is why the historians, they say, around the camel were hands that had been cut off, because they're trying to hold the rope of the camel. And, there's fierce fighting going on. So they had each one, like someone, his hand falls off, another one would go and hold it. And they would try to maintain control until Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, he goes and he brings down the camel and he pierces it with a arrow or with a spear. He strikes the camel falls down, and the war ends. So then Rasulullah, he takes Aisha and he delivers her with her brother Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr back to Medina. And she remained not liking Amir al-Mu'mineen. She remained hating Imam Ali alayhi salam even until Amir al-Mu'mineen passed away. Now, this battle, for those who remained, the battle ended and they ended up giving bay'ah to Amir al-Mu'mineen, the side of the enemies of Amir al-Mu'mineen. So Imam Ali alayhi salam, this is the context. There has been division, there has been a civil war, groups of people who were supposedly close to the Prophet, they betrayed the Prophet, they betrayed Amir al-Mu'mineen, and this division took place. So Imam Ali alayhi salam, he begins by talking about the merits of the Ahl al-Bayt. Because if he's telling them, if you had followed the Ahl al-Bayt from day one, this would not have taken place. But because you left the Ahl al-Bayt. So he says, بِنَا اهْتَدَيْتُمْ فِي الظَّلْمَاءِ وَتَسَنَّمْتُمُ الْعَلْيَاءِ وَبِنَا انْفَجَرْتُمْ عَنِ السِّرَارِ. He says, through us, you got guidance in the darkness. Meaning, comparing with pre-Islamic Arabia, they were living in darkness. But now, 20 years, 24 years after, the Muslim empire is growing and the Muslims are doing much better. They have control of Persia, they have control of parts of the Roman Empire. So he says, بِنَا اهْتَدَيْتُمْ فِي الظَّلْمَاءِ. It's through the Ahl al-Bayt, through us, our family, that you were guided in the darkness. وَتَسَنَّمْتُمُ الْعَلْيَاءِ. And you secured high positions. Amir al-Mu'mineen says tasannamtum because sinam al-jamal, the hump of the camel, it's called sinam. It's the highest part of the camel. So he says you were able to tasannamtum al-alya. You were able to reach high ranks, the higher ranks. وَبِنَا انْفَجَرْتُمْ عَنِ السِّرَارِ. Sirar, it's the night that does not have a moon. Some nights have a full moon, other nights don't have a moon. So it's in the beginning and the end of the lunar month. Those nights are really dark. So you're waiting for Fajr, especially those who lived in the desert. They're waiting for Fajr. So he says, and through us, وَبِنَا انْفَجَرْتُمْ عَنِ السِّرَارِ. Through us, the light of dawn came and guided you out of a gloomy and dark night. So this is a description of pre-Islamic Arabia and what the Ahl al-Bayt did. And then he says, وَقُرَّ سَمْعٌ لم يفقه الواعية كيف يراعي النبأة من أصمته الصيحة. He says the ears which do not listen to the cries may become deaf. How can one who remained deaf to the loud cries of the Qur'an and the Prophet listen to my feeble voice? Meaning that you guys, some of you, you were deaf when the Prophet was speaking, when the Qur'an was speaking to you. The Qur'an was being revealed and you weren't guided. So now how can someone like me guide you when I am less than the Prophet and less than the Qur'an? So he's trying to say that if you were deaf and you didn't even listen to the Qur'an and the original voice, how can you come and listen to me right now? And he's trying to say that those who are fighting me right now, their issue was with the Qur'an and with the Prophet from day one. They didn't even listen to the Prophet when the Prophet says, "Man kuntu mawlah fahada Aliyun mawlah." Ali is the leader. Why do we follow Amir al-Mu'mineen? Because the Prophet tells us, because the Qur'an tells us. So he says, because you didn't even accept that in the beginning, how are you going to accept me right now? So then he says, رُبْطَ جَنَانٍ لَمْ يُفَارَقَهُ الْخَفَقَانِ. And then he's saying there's a different group. There's one group of people who they didn't even listen to the Qur'an and to the Prophet. How are they going to listen to me right now? But then there's another group of people who their hearts, one group whose hearts tremble out of the fear of God, and they don't turn against their values and their teachings, and they don't turn against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here he says, رُبْطَ جَنَانٍ لَمْ يُفَارِقْهُ الْخَفَقَانِ. Janan means something that's hidden. This is why in Arabic they say janeen, the embryo, they call it janeen because it's hidden. Or someone who's majnoon, someone who's sick, and they're crazy. they say this person majnoon because their intellect is hidden. It's not there anymore. Or a field, a garden. What do they call a garden? Jnaina or Jannah as well. Jannah means garden. Why? Because it's so dense that it's hidden. You can't see the ground under it. So the heart, the Arabic language is so, it's so eloquent that there are so many words that describe one thing. The heart is also janan. He says, rubta janan, because it's hidden. Lam yufariqhu al-khafaqan. It's always beating and trembling, palpitated. So with the fear of Allah. So he says that is the one that could get peace. And then he says, ما زلت أنتظر بكم عواقب الغدر وأتوسمكم بحلية المخترين. He says, I always apprehended from you consequences of treachery. I always knew that you are going to betray me. I knew that. And I had seen you through in the garb of the deceitful. I knew that you fall in the traps of the deceitful. Imam Ali alayhi salam, he's talking about Talha and Zubair and Aisha. He says, I knew that you guys were going to turn against me. That's why the day they gave bay'ah, Imam Ali alayhi salam, he says, this is not a legitimate bay'ah. And then they left. When they say we want to go to Umrah, he says, no, you want to betray. He says, I knew that. I knew that about you. But of course, Amir al-Mu'mineen, if anyone else, like they knew that, they would have punished them, they would have held them, they would have not let them leave. Imam Ali alayhi salam, he let things go. And he explains why. So he says, I knew that this is going to happen and you're going to be from those who are basically fooled by Muawiyah. So, and then he says why he didn't do anything about it. He says, سَتَرَنِي عَنْكُمْ جِلْبَابَ الدِّينِ وَبَصَرَنِيكُمْ صِدْقُ النِّيَّةِ. He says, the curtain of religion had kept me hidden from you, but the truth of my intentions disclosed you to me. So he answers two questions. The first is, if Imam Ali knew that they were going to betray him, why didn't he do anything? Why didn't he say anything? He says, سَتَرَنِي عَنْكُمْ جِلْبَابَ الدِّينِ. Because I have religion, I have faith. In Islam, are we allowed to hold someone accountable before the crime has been committed? No. This is why Imam Ali alayhi salam, even the person who killed him, Abdurrahman ibn Muljam, Imam Ali, he entered the masjid and he saw Abdurrahman ibn Muljam. And several times before that, he would say, this man is going to kill me. So some people, they come and they tell him, okay, then arrest him, then hold him accountable. He says, how can I hold him accountable before the crime has been committed? This is the justice of Amir al-Mu'min. Now, if anyone other than Imam Ali, they knew that someone is going to kill them, they would have definitely done something about it. But Imam Ali, he says, Satarani ankum jilbab ad-din, it was religion. And here, religion tells us to not, to give excuses to people or to not, convict someone before they have even committed a crime. So that's the religion. وَبَصَرَنِيكُمْ صِدْقَ النِّيَّةِ. The second question he answered is, where does Imam Ali have this knowledge from? Okay, he says, I knew this, but it was my faith that kept me. How do you know this? It was the sidq al-niyyah. It was the pure intention. My purity. It was the purity of Amir al-Mu'mineen that made me see the truth. And we have many hadith regarding this. If someone purifies their heart is so pure, they're going to be able to see reality. If your heart is so pure, so disattached from this dunya, you will be able to see the reality of this life. You will be able to see reality of individuals. You have someone, you want to do a business transaction with them, you want to talk with them, you're going to know if this person's a deceitful person or not. Amir al-Mu'min says, I knew that, and I saw that in all of you. That's how Rasulullah, he tells, Zubair, he tells him, you're going to kill Ali ibn Abi Talib. So here, this is the foresight that religion gives you and faith gives an individual, and the purity of intention, it gives you that foresight. Now, hindsight is something that a lot of people can have because it's based off of an experience. So you know the past, but foresight is seeing the future and making wise decisions that will not put you in a difficult situation later on. Imam Ali alayhi salam, he always had that foresight, where At all times, he never did anything that someone could come even 20 years later, 1400 years later, they could come and say Ali ibn Abi Talib caused division within the ummah. When he didn't fight, he didn't cause bloodshed for the Khilafah. Later on, the Khilafah came to him and they turned against him. And when he saw them turning against him, he allowed them to go because he can't hold them responsible before the crime has been committed. But once they betrayed, then he went out to battle and he took an army because that's what he had to do to defend the unity of the Muslims. And then he says, أقمت لكم على سنن الحق في جواد المظلة حيث تلتقون ولا دليل وتحتفرون ولا تميهون. He said, I stood for you on the path of truth among misleading tracks where you met each other but there was no leader, and you dug but got no water. This is a description of how the Muslims were lost and they were astray. After the assassination of Uthman, they had no one. For 3 days they remained without a leader. So here Amir al-Mu'mineen, he's saying, I am the one. أقمت لكم على سنن الحق في جواد المظلة. I am the one who stood on the path of the truth while you guys were all being misled. You didn't know which way to go and you were digging and digging, but you have no leader and you could not find water. And here, this is basically he's trying to say that you're digging to try to find water because water is what you need. Water is what you need for survival. Here he's saying, the water is the guidance that you couldn't find. And I am the one who came and brought you that guidance. And the Qur'an also gives us this example with regards to Imam al-Mahdi. The Qur'an says, أَرَأَيْتُمْ إِنْ أَصْبَحَ مَاؤُكُمْ غَوْرًا فَمَنْ يَأْتِيكُمْ بِمَاءٍ مَعِينٍ. If your water is too deep in the earth, you dig and dig and dig and you can't find it, who is it that's going to bring you water? The apparent meaning of this is water. Yes, water is for survival. But the deeper meaning is water is for guidance. And who is the one that gives you survival and guidance? That is Imam al-Mahdi. So that verse is in reference to Imam al-Mahdi. And here Amir al-Mu'mineen says, you were digging and digging, but you can't find the guidance. And I am the one who came and brought you that guidance when you were looking for it and you couldn't find it. And then he says, اليوم أنطق لكم العجماء ذات البيان. Today I am making these things that don't speak. There are things that don't speak, but they are suggestive and they're so clear when you see it, even though something that doesn't speak, but now you see the reality. So he's saying now we see the truth. When we were for 24 years, and before that, Rasulullah was saying, hold on to the Ahl al-Bayt. Fatima al-Zahra says, hold on to the Ahl al-Bayt. They are the source of unity. You won't be divided. Now, look what these people, they tried to do, and this is the consequence of it. Come to me, and you will see the reality. So even though sometimes you don't even have to speak, where you will see the reality in front of you. اليوم أنطق لكم العجماء ذات البيان. Today I'm making these dumb things speak to you. Some dumb meaning the one that does not speak. The suggestive ideas and deep musings, which are full of descriptive power. And then he says, عزب رأي امرئ تخلف عني. The opinion of the person who abandons me is the opinion that goes astray. There's two ways to understand this. One, he's telling people, whoever goes against me is going to be astray. Another group, they say, no, he's doing a dua. Whoever turns against me, this person will never find solution. Scholars, they say the most likely is he's informing them. Whoever does not follow Ali ibn Abi Talib will go astray. And this is something that Rasulullah said on the day of Ghadir. He says, "Man kuntu mawlah fahada aliyun mawlah. Allahumma wali man walah, wa adi man adah, wansur man nasarah, wa khudhul man khadarah." Oh Allah, be with the one who is with Ali ibn Abi Talib. Either Rasulullah is giving a description of what will happen, or he's doing a dua. In the issue of Rasulullah, it's most likely a dua. Here, Amir al-Mu'mineen says, "Azab al-ra'yu imra'in takhallafa anni." The opinion of the one who abandons me is astray, and he's informing them. And then he says, "Ma shakaktu fil haqq mundu ra'aytu." I have never doubted in the truth since it has been shown to me. I never doubted the truth. I always knew the truth, and I had the truth with me from the moment I see it. And then he tells them, لم يوجس موسى خيفة على نفسه أشفق من غلبة الجهال ودول الضلال. He's describing Musa because the Qur'an describes Moses when Moses, he was in front of Pharaoh and Pharaoh brings out the magicians. He tells them, you do your magic. So the magicians, they come and they make their ropes turn into snakes. Once Moses saw that, Allah says in the Quran, فَأَوْجَسَ فِي نَفْسِهِ خِيفَةً مُوسَى. Musa became afraid. So some people, they come and they say, why would Musa become afraid? Imam Ali alayhi salam, he's explaining, because he's relating it to himself. He says, Musa, when he was afraid, when he saw the magicians make snakes out of ropes, this was not a fear for his own life. He was afraid that people are going to be misled because they see this magic in front of them. لم يوجس موسى خيفة على نفسه أشفق من غلبة الجهال ودول الضلال. He says he was afraid that those who are ignorant, they're going to be misled by those who are misleading them. And Imam Ali is trying to say the same thing. He says, I had fear for the ummah, not because I'm afraid for my own life, not because I'm worried about my own power and my own authority, but I'm afraid the same fear that Musa had. I'm afraid for the Muslims. I'm afraid for the ummah. I'm afraid that there's going to be division, and I don't want that. And then he says, اليوم تواقفنا على سبيل الحق والباطل من وثق بماء لم يظمأ. Today, we stand on the crossroads of truth and untruth. Meaning that now that the battle has ended, now we know where the truth is and where the battle is. The one who is sure of getting water feels no thirst. من وثق بماء لم يظمأ. Meaning that now we saw it, we're at a crossroads. There's the truth and there's falsehood. But the one who has access to the water will never feel thirsty. What is he trying to say? He's saying if you have the guidance of me, Ali ibn Abi Talib's guidance, you're not going to go astray. Stay with me and you will not go astray. This is a short sermon of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib, sermon number 4 of Nahjul Balagha. There are other sources for this, in Al-Mufid and Tabari, they mention this. And most of the sermons, if not all of them in Nahjul Balagha, they have alternative sources. So here we will end. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. وصلى الله على محمد وعلى آله الطاهرين.